A single chloroplast in the electron microscope looks like this. What you're seeing is nature's solar panel. And these membranes here contain the green pigment chlorophyll. And what I set about doing in graduate school was to try to understand the structure, the internal structure of each of those thin little membranes. Well, not too far from here, the University of Colorado, where I did my graduate work, I learned a technique called freeze etching that enabled us to break open and look inside those membranes. That's what I did for my doctoral thesis. And when I set up my own lab, I discovered this beautiful organism. It's a photosynthetic bacterium. It has photosynthetic membranes too. But what I discovered is so cool about these is the reaction centers in these membranes, and you can see it. They're arranged in a regular pattern, almost like bricks in a wall or tiles on a floor. That meant that we could use a kind of fancy image processing technique to actually work out the structure of one of those individual subunits, and our lab was the very first one to work out the three-dimensional structure of a photosynthetic reaction center. And the paper with this work actually wound up on the cover of the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, which is the journal Nature. Now, for any of you young people who are contemplating careers in academic science, I have to tell you something about timing. That paper in that issue of Nature was published in the exact week I came up for tenure at my university. And I bought extra copies of the journal, and I made sure that everybody on the promotions committee had a copy. So that's one of the reasons I'm still where I'm at. So that's a little bit about me. Now a little bit about you. And what I mean by that is the state of Kansas. Kansas has, many people would say that Kansas produces more history than can be consumed locally. And therefore your history often affects the rest of the country. And many of you may know in 1999, your state board of education actually deleted evolution from the science curriculum in the state. Now a lot of people outside of Kansas misinterpreted that. They thought that Kansas had banned evolution. That was never true. But it is true that they took it out of the curriculum and therefore out of the test, and therefore many teachers saw no reason to teach it because it wasn't going to be in the year-end test. What happened then was a concerted effort by a lot of people, including Kansas Citizens for Science, to do something about that. And lo and behold, in primary elections, in the summer of 2000, you can see the date right up there, August 2000, enough of the anti-evolution candidates lost in the primaries to guarantee a pro-science majority in Kansas Board of Education. And that was really my first barnstorming tour through Kansas. If you read this article in the New York Times, you'll see that I worked with a wonderful Kansas professor named Steve Case, and Kansas Citizens actually rented me a pickup truck, which is what I'm used to driving at home, and I drove around the state and gave lectures stumping for pro-science candidates. So the good news is all of this happened. But democracy can swing both ways. And 4 years later, an anti-evolution majority was elected to the Kansas board, and they decided that they were going to reverse things yet again. Now, what did those folks do? What they decided to do was, first of all, to rewrite your state's science education standards to sort of water down evolution and give hints of ideas like scientific creationism and intelligent design. And they wanted some sort of political cover for that. They didn't just want to vote it. So they decided they'd have a series of hearings on sort of evolution versus creationism. And that's the reason for the headline that you see right there. And in Kansas, what happened was a public set of hearings. There was only one side of the issue, intelligent design creationism, that was presented, because every major scientific organization in the United States urged its members to boycott these hearings because we already knew how the board was going to vote. And what they did in 2005 is very interesting. They didn't just do something with evolution. They rewrote the entire definition of science itself. And let me explain what I mean. Prior to 2005, your standards had this very simple explanation for what science is. Science, and these are the exact words. Science is the human activity of seeking natural explanations for what we observe in the world around us. Pretty straightforward, easy for kids to understand, and easy to teach. Here's what the board changed it to in 2005. Science is a systematic method of continuing investigation using observation, hypothesis testing, measurement, experimentation, logical argument, and theory building to lead to more adequate explanations. Now you notice what they did. They didn't like natural explanations. They wanted more adequate ones. Now, why didn't they like natural explanations? Several members of the board explained. And they said they thought science was too narrow if it limited itself to naturalistic explanations. And they wanted to make room in science for non-naturalistic explanations. And I could never understand what a non-naturalistic explanation was in science unless it was a supernatural explanation. And supernatural explanations may be true, but they certainly aren't scientific. And in a trial I'll tell you about in a minute, I was actually on the stand. And the attorney for the opposing us asked me a question. He said, Dr. Miller, you're a Roman Catholic. What do you have against supernatural explanations? And I said, Catholic heck. This was fall of 2005. I said, Catholic heck, I'm a Boston Red Sox fan. And I can't think of any explanation for what happened in the 2004 World Series that does not involve the supernatural. And fortunately, the judge rather liked that. And I said, so, you know, you'd be surprised, in my part of the country in New England, how many people thought that in 2004, God was just tired of George Steinbrenner and wanted to teach him a lesson. And that might explain things. And now God has called George Steinbrenner home so they can talk about this face to face. But nonetheless, I said, you know, that might be the explanation for how the Red Sox came from 3 games down against the Yankees. It could be true. But do you know what? It's not testable. And therefore, it's not a scientific explanation. And that's the point. But nonetheless, this is what the school board wanted to do. And the interesting thing about this is, again, they had a whole series of hearings in which they did this to sort of provide political cover, so that rather than concentrating on improving the schools and so forth, they spent a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of publicity to give themselves political cover to rewrite standards that they were determined to rewrite all along. Well, that was in 2005. 2006, your state reacted to that. And in the primary elections in 2006, a pro-science majority emerged from the primary elections 4 years ago. This is the report in Science Magazine, Evolution Trumps Intelligent Design in Kansas Vote. That pro-science majority was actually enlarged in 2008. So now on most issues, it's a 7-3 majority on your state board. And Kansas actually has today some of the very best science standards in the country. And I think it's very important that voters pay attention to these elections to keep your standards where they are, because they are really quite good. Now, this wasn't happening just in Kansas. In the space of 11 months, I actually found myself testifying in federal court in 2 federal trials on the issue of teaching evolution. One in Georgia and one that I will tell you about it in some detail in Pennsylvania. The next summer, as you already know, there was an election in Kansas that turned on the issue of evolution, but it turns out the same thing happened in the state of Ohio. And I show this because I want to emphasize this really is a national issue in which Kansas is just one of the battlegrounds. Now, in case you don't remember in your own state from 2006, I want to show you what this was actually like in Ohio. So this is the front page of the largest newspaper in Ohio about 10 days before the '06 election. It's the Sunday edition, normally low-profile contest in Spotlight. They talk about the evolution debate. And to show the debate, they highlighted the contest for a seat in the Akron area between the leader of the anti-evolution forces on the board, a University of Akron professor named Deborah Owens-Fink, and her opponent, this fellow right here, with the unlikely name of Tom Sawyer. Hard to miss that on the ballot.